In the quiet town of Dobbs Ferry, New York, a boy named Mark sat on the carpeted floor of his room, surrounded by disassembled parts of an old computer. He wasn't more than 10, but the wires, processors, and blinking lights fascinated him, far more than cartoons or toys. While other kids were glued to Game Boys, Mark was trying to understand how the games actually worked. Not how to beat them, but how to build them. His parents, Edward and Karen, were supportive but slightly bewildered. His father, a dentist, had bought the family their first computer in the early 90s. He expected it to help with homework or maybe typing lessons. He didn't expect his son to start coding basic software within months. Mark wasn't your average curious child. He didn't ask why the sky was blue, he asked how the internet worked, how websites were built, why a click did what it did. While his classmates played outside, Mark buried himself in manuals and programming books, some of which even college students avoided. His hunger to create something that people could use, something digital, powerful, and interactive, grew stronger every day. By the time he was 12, Mark had built a messaging program called Zuckerberg so that his family could communicate between rooms in their house. His father used it in his dental office to communicate with the receptionist. While others were discovering AOL, Mark was building his own version of it. In middle school, he joined fencing, not because he had a passion for swords, but because he liked strategy. He saw everything as a game of logic, even human behavior. He started reading psychology not to understand emotions, but to understand how people respond and what made them tick, click, and engage. His talent didn't go unnoticed. By high school, he was taking graduate-level computer courses and was already being courted by tech companies. Microsoft and AOL tried to recruit him after he developed a music player that could learn users' preferences, a precursor to but Mark wasn't interested in jobs. He wasn't even chasing money. He wanted something bigger, something only he could see. When the college acceptance letter from Harvard arrived, there wasn't a dramatic moment. No tears, no shouting. He looked at it, nodded, and quietly told his dad, "I think I'll go." But what he really meant was, "I'm going there to build something. I don't know what yet, but I will." Harvard was a playground for the ambitious. Future senators, hedge fund managers, and world leaders walked the same halls. But Mark didn't care about titles. He was focused. Coldly focused. While others built resumes, he was building code. In his cramped dorm room, he set up a workstation, dual monitors, stacks of Red Bull, and walls covered with sticky notes of code snippets and random thoughts. His roommate recalled how Mark could sit for hours in silence, typing furiously, lost in the world inside his machine. Then came a night that would change everything, a night of impulsive genius, caffeine, and controversy. He had an idea, small one at first, a site where students could compare to classmates and vote who was more attractive. Crude, yes, but the backend system he built in a single night to handle data and image requests. Pure brilliance. The site went live under the name Facebook. Within hours, Harvard's network started to crash under the traffic. Students were addicted. Word spread. Servers strained. And by morning, the administration had taken it down. He was reprimanded, nearly expelled. But Mark wasn't ashamed. If anything, he saw potential. What fascinated him wasn't the controversy, it was the engagement, the reaction, the data. That's when he started thinking, what if there was a way for people to connect online, not just rate each other, but share, update, post? What if the internet had an identity layer, something that brought people closer, digitally? He didn't know it yet, but the seed of Facebook had been planted, and it would soon explode into something the world had never seen. After the shutdown of Facebook, most students would have shrunk back. Harvard wasn't known for mercy, and Mark had just embarrassed the entire campus, but he didn't retreat. Instead, he quietly watched how people had responded to something he built in one night. He watched how glued they were to interaction, how eager they were to engage even for something as shallow as comparing pictures. He saw something that no one else did. Not just traffic, not just numbers. He saw behavior, a need. People wanted to connect. They were looking for a digital space that wasn't anonymous chat rooms or cluttered forums. They wanted something tied to identity, something real. Mark kept to himself in the days following the disciplinary hearing, but his mind was on fire. He began sketching out something bigger, cleaner, smarter, and far more meaningful than Timash. He called it the Facebook. At first, it was just an idea scribbled on paper, then quickly transformed into lines of PHP code and SQL tables. He locked himself in his dorm room for hours, days, nights. Everything outside his screen disappeared. He barely spoke to anyone unless it was about databases. user interfaces, or login protocols. Pizza boxes piled up, Red Bull cans scattered, and the screen glowed late into the night, as if whispering secrets of something great in the making. Didn't care about how pretty it looked. He cared about whether it worked, whether it loaded fast, whether it connected people. Then, one evening, he turned to his roommates and said, almost casually, I think I'm ready to launch this. No fanfare, no marketing campaign, just a line of code pushed live. Just a dorm room project named the Facebook.com, restricted to Harvard students only. It spread like fire. Within 24 hours, hundreds of students signed up, then thousands. Within a week, the majority of the Harvard campus had profiles. The engagement wasn't just high, it was obsessive. People would refresh their pages every few minutes. New photos, statuses, relationships. People weren't just consuming content, they were the content. Mark watched all of it unfold with eerie calm. He wasn't surprised. He had predicted this. Not the scale maybe, but the behavior. And that was always what drove him, understanding human behavior through systems. Word got out beyond Harvard. Students at Yale and Columbia wanted it. Then Stanford. Suddenly Mark had a decision to make. Was this a campus app, or was it something more? Could this be global? He brought in his friend Eduardo Saverin to help manage the servers and business side. He wasn't a businessman himself, not yet. He was just the guy with the vision and the code. But the need for structure was rising fast. Requests flooded in. Emails from students across the US asking, when will my school get Facebook? Mark saw opportunity, not pressure. He began coding day and night, adding new features, friend requests, walls, messages. Each line of code brought people closer, not just digitally, but emotionally. But with growth came tension. Eduardo wanted slow, cautious expansion. Mark wanted scale, explosive scale. Then came Sean Parker, the founder of Napster, the rogue genius of Silicon Valley. He saw Facebook and immediately said, this is it. He met with Mark, and within hours, the two connected on a wavelength that was electric. Sean told him to drop the V from the name. Just Facebook, cleaner, bolder, more iconic. He told Mark to move to Palo Alto, that Harvard would still be there, but opportunities like this wouldn't. Mark didn't hesitate. He packed his things, left Harvard behind, no degree, no plan B, just a vision. In Palo Alto they rented a small house that turned into a hacker paradise. Code sprints, brainstorming sessions, whiteboards covered in database architecture, engineers sleeping on couches, days blending into nights. It wasn't just a startup, it was a movement. Investors started circling, but Mark didn't flinch. He wasn't building Facebook for money. He was building it to change how people lived, how they interacted. He rejected offers, huge offers. He turned down a $1 billion acquisition from Yahoo with a smile and a shrug, because he wasn't done. Not even close. He wasn't chasing money, he was chasing utility, impact, legacy. As Facebook scaled, so did the criticism, privacy concerns, data leaks, legal battles, even lawsuits from his own But Mark didn't blink. He kept coding, kept shipping features, kept focusing on one thing, making Facebook better. He knew storms would come. He also knew that those who survive storms don't just stand tall, they reshape the sky. He once told a room full of engineers, move fast and break things. It wasn't just a slogan, it was his mantra. Because in his mind, speed mattered more than perfection. Learning mattered more than playing it safe. And so, from a dorm room to a global company, Facebook kept growing. 1 user, then 1 million, then 100 million, then a billion. Mark had gone from a quiet kid in New York taking apart his dad's PC, to a global icon sitting at the helm of the most powerful social platform the world had ever seen. But to him, it wasn't about being a CEO. It was still about the code. It's still about the mission. To make the world more open and connected. Facebook wasn't just growing, it was expanding like a living organism, feeding on every new connection, every uploaded photo, every status update. It wasn't a website anymore. It was a digital universe. And at the center of it sat Mark Zuckerberg, still in his hoodie, still typing code like a college kid working on a school project, except now that project was shaping the lives of billions. In Palo Alto, the Facebook house had turned into something else entirely. It was no longer just red balls and code. It was departments, investors, expectations. Mark had to step into a role he had never trained for, CEO. He wasn't a businessman. He didn't attend meetings with a type A, but he knew his product better than anyone else. And more than that, he understood the people who used it. The more Facebook grew, the more questions emerged. Could it remain free forever? How would it generate revenue? Was this just a fad, or the beginning of something that would redefine human interaction? But Mark didn't rush toward answers. He believed in patience. He believed in building first, monetizing later. He believed that if you created something truly useful, the money would follow. In 2007, Facebook introduced a newsfeed, a feature that many thought would backfire. People didn't want their actions broadcasted, critics said. It was too much, too invasive. But Mark saw further. He knew that the feed wasn't just about updates, it was about moments, micro-connections, digital presence. Users protested. Some even quit the platform, but most stayed, and soon they were addicted. The feed became the heartbeat of Facebook. It changed how people consumed content, how they shared their lives, how they saw each other, and Mark didn't flinch. He watched the data, tweaked the code, and let the system evolve. With every new milestone, 10 million users, then 50, then 100. Facebook began to attract giants. Google, Yahoo, Microsoft. Everyone wanted a piece. They offered partnerships, ad placements, investment deals. Some wanted to buy Facebook outright, but Mark had one answer: no. Privacy concerns started surfacing. People were beginning to understand that the more they shared, the more Facebook knew. Governments raised eyebrows. Watchdog groups took aim. Mark was called to hearings, questioned by politicians, grilled by journalists. He didn't always have the perfect answer, but he never denied responsibility. He never blamed others. He faced every microphone with the same calm, focused tone he used when debugging a server crash. He learned, adapted, built stronger protocols, hired security teams, brought in data scientists, but he never stopped shipping features. He believed that the mission to connect people was worth the risk, the noise, the criticism. And then came the IPO. Wall Street had been waiting. Analysts had predicted it for years. Facebook's value had crossed billions, and yet Mark had stayed silent. But now, it was time. In 2012, Facebook went public. The world watched as Mark rang the Nasdaq bell. He wore his signature hoodie, no suit, no script, just the same focused, quiet presence. Some mocked his attire, others questioned his leadership, but Mark didn't care. He wasn't performing, he was working. The IPO wasn't perfect. Technical glitches, overvaluations, panic selling, the media attacked. Investors got nervous, and for a moment it seemed like the dream might shatter. But Mark didn't flinch. Because within months, Facebook's value soared again. Mobile engagement exploded. The user base crossed 1 billion, and Mark, he wasn't celebrating. He was thinking about what came next. He started acquiring. First Instagram, then WhatsApp. Billions spent not for revenue, but for people, for reach, for engagement. He saw the future was mobile, visual, instant, and he didn't wait. He moved. Critics screamed monopoly, but Mark didn't care about noise. He cared about mission. Behind the scenes he was changing. He wasn't just a coder anymore. He was a leader, a strategist. He began hosting internal Q&As with employees, not just about product, but about purpose. Why are we doing this? He would ask, not how do we grow? And he began thinking bigger. What if Facebook could bring internet to the 4 billion people who didn't have it? What if it could become not just a social platform, but an infrastructure layer for communication, commerce, education? He launched Internet.org, drones, satellites, AI labs. His ambitions left Silicon Valley stunned. Because he wasn't playing the game anymore, he was rewriting it. At home he changed too. He got married, became a father. His posts softened. He shared pictures of his daughter, talked about values, responsibility, the world she would inherit. But his mission remained the same: make the world more open, more connected, more equal. Even as fake news scandals erupted, even as election interference emerged, even as whistleblowers came forward, Mark stayed in the spotlight, not hiding, not deflecting. Every time he was pulled into a congressional hearing, he walked in like an engineer, not a politician. Calm, clipped, focused, never emotional, always analytical, because he believed in something deeper than applause. He believed in the system, in the network, in the code. And no matter how big the storm, he always went back to his roots. A laptop, a terminal, and a vision. Mark had already changed how the world connected. From dorm room to global boardrooms, from a Harvard student to one of the most recognized faces in tech history, he had turned a website into an ecosystem. But now, even that wasn't enough. His mind was moving beyond likes, posts, and shares. He wasn't thinking about what Facebook was. He was thinking about what it could be. By 2019, Facebook had crossed over 2 billion users. It was no longer just a social platform, it was part of daily life, a place where people got their news, their memories, their connections. But Mark saw cracks. He knew attention spans were shrinking. He saw rising distrust in big tech. He watched countries fight over data borders. And he realized one simple truth. The future wouldn't be built by tweaking timelines. It had to be reinvented in late 2021. Mark shocked the world when he announced the rebranding of Facebook Inc. to Meta. It wasn't just a name change, it was a direction change. He stood on a digital stage wearing his usual quiet expression, surrounded by immersive 3D renderings of future homes, offices, playgrounds, none of them real, yet all of them possible. He spoke of a metaverse, fully digital world where people wouldn't just browse the internet, they would live in it. To the average viewer, it felt like science fiction. But to Mark, it was logic. If Facebook connected the world through 2D interaction, the metaverse would make it 3D. It was the natural evolution of presence, of experience, of immersion. The reaction, polarized. Some called it visionary, others called it escapist. Some saw it as the boldest bet since the invention of the smartphone. Others saw it as a desperate pivot. But Mark didn't flinch. He'd heard it all before, and like every chapter of his life, he tuned out the noise, dialed in the code, and doubled down. He poured billions into Meta's reality labs. He built teams across continents to develop VR headsets, augmented reality, wearables, motion capture systems. He started hiring AI experts not just to enhance feeds, but to build worlds where people could attend weddings, play chess, build businesses, all without stepping out of their homes. He called it the future of human interaction. But behind the headlines, the backlash was mounting. Stock prices dropped. Investors grew anxious. Meta was bleeding cash in the short term. And some of the old guard inside the company questioned whether the vision was too far ahead of its time. Still, Mark stood firm. For him, leadership wasn't about comfort. It was about conviction. He wasn't trying to build the next Facebook. He was trying to build the next internet. He began rethinking the very fabric of how people connect. Spatial computing, mixed reality, workspaces, AI companions. Meta wasn't just a company anymore. It was a digital civilization in construction. And amidst all this, Mark began to change, too. His public image softened. He traded in his robotic tone for warmth, shared videos of himself fencing, surfing, spending time with his daughters. People saw not just the CEO, but the man behind the machine. He began writing again, not just PR updates, but letters, essays, thoughts on the balance between innovation and responsibility. He wrote about the burden of power, about the ethics of building platforms that shape public thought, and people began to notice. This wasn't the same Mark who hid behind code. This was a version tempered by mistakes, hardened by criticism, yet still hungry to build. He leaned into artificial intelligence, pushing Meta to the front lines of the AI arms race. While competitors chased chatbots and search engines, Mark saw AI as a tool for expression, for creation, AI that would design, speak, perform, even code. He wasn't trying to beat others, he was trying to free the human mind from friction. But for every leap forward, there was a battle. Governments sued Meta over monopolistic practices. Users left the platform in waves. Whistleblowers accused the company of prioritizing profit over well-being. And every time, Mark took the heat. He sat before Senate panels with his emotionless stare. He listened to senators fumble over tech terms, and still he answered with clarity and restraint. Not once did he claim perfection, only intent. Because at his core, Mark Zuckerberg wasn't a billionaire chasing legacy. He was still the same hacker. From his dorm room, still believing that technology could unite more than it divides. Still believing that if you built something meaningful, everything else would follow, he told his team. Again and again, the journey is 1% finished, was his philosophy. Mark Zuckerberg had built an empire, one that didn't rise from oil, land, or factories, but from lines of code and human connection. As the world spun faster into the digital future, Mark found himself not just leading a company, but steering a movement, one that questioned the very nature of identity, interaction, and influence. In the early years, Mark had been the underdog, the college dropout, the hoodie-wearing techie disrupting the social order. But now, in his 40s, he was something else entirely, a gatekeeper to a massive part of the world's digital soul, and with that power came responsibility that weighed heavier than any dollar amount could measure. Mark knew the platforms he built were no longer just about likes and photos. They were political stages. economic battlegrounds, social mirrors. Every algorithm tweak could shift moods, move markets, even sway elections. And every decision he made could either protect or damage lives. He had faced criticism from nearly every angle. Privacy activists, political parties, human rights organizations, each had its case, and many of them were valid. But what kept Mark grounded was his refusal to see Facebook or Meta as just a company. For him, it was a mission that he started, talking more about purpose, not in grand press releases, but in town halls with his team. He told young engineers that their job wasn't to increase engagement, it was to build tools that brought value to people's lives, that everything they made should serve connection, not addiction. He wasn't naive. He knew they'd made mistakes, some small, some massive. He didn't run from those truths, but he also believed in learning through doing, in building forward. That's why, even when Meta faced record-breaking fines, data scandals, and legislative crackdowns, Mark didn't hide. He adapted. He launched new transparency tools. He opened up datasets for academic research. He placed limits on political ads and fake news distribution, not because he was forced to, but because, deep down, he still believed in the ideal that got him started. A connected world is a better world. But connection was changing. People weren't just using platforms to share, they were using them to live, virtual concerts, remote weddings, digital education. For millions, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp weren't apps, they were infrastructure. And that's where the metaverse returned. Mark's dream of a digital parallel world wasn't just a fantasy. He saw it taking shape in gaming, in workplace collaboration, in education. He envisioned a world where your digital self had as much depth, freedom, and creativity as your physical one, where distance no longer mattered, where opportunity wasn't gated by geography. He poured billions more into building this future. The critics called it madness. They mocked his vision, compared it to failed ventures of the past. But Mark stayed the course, because he wasn't looking for validation, he was building for time. He knew the metaverse might not succeed in 5 years, maybe not even 10, but he believed that in 20 years, humanity would need more than smartphones and touchscreens. It would need spaces, virtual, immersive, human-first, spaces to interact meaningfully across continents. That's what kept him up at night. Not share prices, not headlines. The future of how we would live. In the midst of all this, Mark's personal life became a quiet source of strength. His wife Priscilla had always been more than a partner, she was a moral compass. Her work in healthcare and philanthropy often reminded Mark of the world beyond screens. Their children brought perspective, too. With every bedtime story, every innocent question, Mark was reminded that his work wasn't just about scale, it was about legacy. That's when he doubled down on the Zuckerberg initiative, a philanthropic arm aimed at curing all disease, improving education, and advancing equal opportunity. It wasn't just charity, it was systems-level thinking, engineering for humanity. And this wasn't a pivot, that it was a continuation, because at his core, Mark Zuckerberg was always an engineer. Whether building a network of college students, or a global platform, or a metaverse, he solved problems, not with slogans, but with systems. That's why, even when AI became the next big wave, Mark didn't panic. He leaned in. He opened AI research to the public, released open-source models, invited collaboration. While competitors built closed systems, Mark believed the future of intelligence should be shared. He talked less in public, posted fewer updates, but he worked more, and more deliberately. He wasn't chasing headlines anymore, he was laying foundations for a world where digital identity was secure, where creators owned their content, where learning was personalized by intelligent tutors, where virtual doctors treated real patients across borders. The tools were being built quietly, but intentionally, because Mark knew revolutions don't start loud, they start in silence, in long nights of code, on increments with engineers, in failed demos, in late night strategy calls. In doubt, and eventually, in breakthrough. As the years passed, the world slowly began to see the fuller picture. They saw Meta investing in mental health tools, in educational programs, in digital safety protocols. They saw Mark not as a villain or a genius, but as a builder, flawed, yes, but focused. They saw a man who never tried to be a hero, just someone who kept building. He had been underestimated, overhyped, villainized, deified, but through it all he kept showing up, kept solving the next problem, kept shipping the next product. And as AI grew smarter, and virtual spaces more real, and the physical and digital worlds began to blur, People finally understood. Mark wasn't trying to make a company for this year. He was making a framework for the next century. And when one day someone logs into a virtual classroom from a village in Africa, or a teenager designs her dream business in VR, or a patient gets therapy from an AI-trained counselor miles away from any clinic, somewhere in the background, a line of Mark's code will still be running, not seen, not noticed, but vital, just like the man who wrote it.